And we're back in the studio on Easter Sunday evening. Like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Easter Sunday here with me in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. So, a movie anniversary. This is a film that is maybe a little bit under the radar today, now 30 years after its theatrical release. Shockingly good reviews from critics, an Academy Award nomination for an actor in a cliche though this may be, a breakout performance in his film debut. On this day, April 5th, 1996, with me in attendance after all of the New York papers gave this film favorable reviews, Gregory Hoblit's Primal Fear opened in theaters. And Primal Fear stars Richard Gere as a defense attorney, a very sort of slick and smiles for the cameras, good-looking dude. In a different life, he would be the character that John Travolta plays based on a real-life guy in the film from a few years later, A Civil Action. But somebody who doesn't mind cameras, doesn't mind talking to the media. He would be a celebrity. He would be a star attorney on the internet today. This is what we would get if you watch this film for the first time now. Martin Vale, almost like this movie is going to pull back the veil, although he spells his last name V-A-I-L. But Primal Fear features Richard Gere in a lead performance. And Richard Gere, it's a little bit, again, the movie is maybe under the radar, but first off, how big a star Richard Gere was, a lot of people under 40 don't really know. He's just an old guy. He's got the white hair now. He doesn't work as much as he used to. But Richard Gere was one of the performers who defined the 80s and the 90s, with movies in the 80s like An Officer and a Gentleman, which, I mean, that's one of those kind of touchstone generational films. It meant a lot to a lot of people. And my dad never liked Richard Gere as an actor until much later in his career. My father, there were very few people he disliked just on sight. There was something about Richard Gere that just pissed him off. He didn't even like An Officer and a Gentleman. Everyone liked that movie. My dad's like, I can't stand that guy. What's his name, Gere? I hate that guy. But then in the later era, in some of the movies, he did a film, Arbitrage, my dad was a fan of, and a couple of others. He somewhat came around on him. But Gere was so busy, and not just randomly making movies. During the decade of the 90s, he was in huge films, either, again, culturally important, sociologically important films, or big box office hits, or in some cases both. So, for example, in 1990, he's Julia Roberts' co-star in Pretty Woman. And he doesn't really have much to do as far as film acting. He just has to smile, look good, and, wisecracks like talking to Viv saying, we basically do the exact same thing. We both screw people for money. But he does enough, and that movie was an enormous hit and for sure launched Julia Roberts into the stratosphere. But the same year, he plays a dirty, slimeball police officer in the movie Internal Affairs with Andy Garcia, among others. And although Gere was not necessarily known as an actor with tremendous range, he could play likable, and man, was he good as a sniveling weasel. And a guy if this guy is after you, you turn around, you get the fuck away. Don't stop running, don't look back, just go. The character that he played in Internal Affairs. But he made a lot of interesting films. They weren't entirely successful. Gere did Final Analysis in 1992. It's okay. I mean, a little bit of stunt casting, Kim Basinger and Uma Thurman as sisters. I mean, yeah, they're both gorgeous, but, I mean, you got to be kidding me. They're sisters? Come on. But that movie was not entirely successful. Mr. Jones with, I think, Lena Olin, not really that great. And what was the other one? Summersby with Jodie Foster. A lot of people liked it. That movie completely falls flat. He did First Night, a really interesting attempt at a King Arthur story with Sean Connery playing King Arthur. Connery played Robin Hood in Robin and Marion with Audrey Hepburn, almost the last movie of her career. And then he had a brief cameo as King Arthur in the Kevin Costner version of Robin Hood. But in First Night, Connery plays Arthur. He literally plays King Arthur. And Camelot and all of this kind of shit is in there. And Gere plays Lancelot. And the movie should be better than it is. It has a fantastic score from Jerry Goldsmith, top 10 best Jerry Goldsmith score. It is beautiful, and it makes the movie seem better than it is because it is almost a perfect orchestral score. And you know, if Jerry Goldsmith wasn't John Williams, nobody was John Williams. But Goldsmith maybe he's the second best composer. Like if somebody said they think that he's number 2 right behind John Williams, okay. He had so many different kinds of scores that were just magnificent, and his score for First Night was one of them. And he also did, what else did he do? Oh, he did Red Corner, not good. He did the remake of The Day of the Jackal with Bruce Willis. What the fuck were they doing? What were they doing? Not good. So he was working feverishly, and some successes, some failures, but he just never stopped grinding away, and just, you know, so many different roles, gave everything that he had. And again, you think about a guy who was known, he was a pretty boy, not really much of an actor, American Gigolo, whatever in the 80s. But even comparing First Night, which was a big Hollywood production, I want to say that was directed by Jerry Zucker from Airplane and Naked Gun. I'm pretty sure that he directed First Night. And then he immediately turns into Primal Fear. The films were shot almost back to back. And First Night, as I say, it isn't entirely successful, but Primal Fear, for what it sets out to do, hits a home run. I mean, this is a really good movie. The Rotten Tomatoes score, I think it's in the high 70s. I feel like it should be higher than that. But as I mentioned before, I gave you all of this kind of backdrop and backstory. This film had good advance buzz in the internet existed in 96, but it wasn't anything like it is today. I like to say that, but it's always important to note the promotion of movies was a lot different even when the internet existed, because it didn't have the capabilities of today, not even close. But people were talking about this movie, and then Newsday gave it, I think, 3.5 stars, and the Daily News liked it. It's like I was enough of a movie fan. I was still in film school. I had another 2 semesters before I graduated. I graduated the following year, 13 months after this. But I used to go to stores just to see what the local newspapers, what they had to say about the movies. And if memory serves, Primal Fear was given high marks by all of the New York papers, New York Times, New York Post, Daily News, and Newsday, which I received. My father, we were living in Woodbury at the time. We were just about, no, actually, we may have already moved to Huntington, but it was right around that time. You know, the joke with my father being a CPA, the C in SCF and Co., he didn't think we could move in March. We were going to move in March from an apartment in Woodbury to the house in Huntington because we can't move during tax season. And you know how I convinced him to do it? I said, Dad, if you got sick, you would take a day off, right? Let's just pretend you've got the flu, and that'll be the day we move. And we ended up doing it. I don't think that he really listened to me. Maybe he just needed a little nudge. But I saw this movie on its opening night at the Movies at Sunrise Mall in Massapequa. Man, that whole mall is almost completely gone. It's really terrible for people who grew up around there. Another cliche, but it's sad. So many great memories, not just of shopping in that mall, of playing video games in the 80s and 90s in that mall, but also the number of great movies I saw there. The previous film that I saw at that mall was Heat, which was, 3 months before. That was December of 1995 that Heat came out. The last great movie I saw there was Dark City in 1998. I saw Spielberg's Amistad there. So many great movie memories. White Men Can't Jump, My Cousin Vinny, Basic Instinct, when I was still in high school. But I thought the film was fantastic from the first viewing. There was a big plot twist, at the end, which got people talking. But the film was on its way to being 3.5 stars with or without the plot twist. Yeah, it's jaw-dropping in the manner of like The Sixth Sense or that kind of thing, or Angel Heart if you want to go that route. But it's a really good movie all the way through. And the actor that I teased, you already have figured out if you can see him on the poster. It's Edward Norton. This was his film debut, and he is so good in what amounts to a dual role of 2 characters, one the sort of primary named Aaron and the secondary named Roy. Anytime you have an actor who has to try to play more than one character in a film, it's a challenge for the actor. But clearly the filmmaker, Gregory Hoblit, in the auditions, he knew that Edward Norton was the real deal, that this guy can handle this character. So the story goes that Richard Gere's Martin Vale takes on a case, a kind of a public defender type of a situation, which he normally wouldn't get involved in, but he sees the potential for box office. This is going to be, people are going to be talking about this. His name's going to be in papers. Maybe he'll not only be district attorney, but maybe he'll run for mayor. Maybe he'll have a career in politics if this case goes the way that he thinks it will. So the story is that he meets this kid who is in prison for killing an archbishop. The kid's name is Aaron Stamfer. Aaron Stamfer has dissociative identity disorder is what it's known as today. 30 years ago, they were still calling it multiple personality disorder. He has two personas. His primary persona is a very sweet and gentle, abused and much put upon young man named Aaron, who was an altar boy who was abused by various nefarious individuals in the church. You know, it's supposed to be local. Again, the government, but in this case, it's the church. And we're not talking about, you know, at the level of the papacy and the blue smoke. Just where he is. He was abused. And the idea is, well, maybe they think he killed this archbishop. But they don't think that Aaron killed the archbishop. They think it was his split personality, Roy, who appears to be almost pure evil. And so the movie goes from there, where you start to figure out, okay, we know that the archbishop ended up dead, and it appears that Aaron/Roy committed the murder. But how do we deal with the notion of, is a person responsible? And they did this, of course, in the movie Split. You know, the M. Night Shyamalan, was it James McAvoy? But they did it in the movie Split, where you start to ask yourself, is somebody responsible if they didn't actually commit the crime, if you believe in the psychosis aspect of it? These are all questions that don't have concrete answers. They try to get concrete answers in a courtroom in real life. In the world of this movie, though, Richard Gere sees an angle, and he goes pedal to the metal. And the way that Edward Norton, the way that he hit the scene like a thunderbolt is pretty incredible. I got to throw this in there just so you understand how unusual this is. So he was completely unknown. This is not Jim Carrey in 1994 seeming to come out of nowhere and having three enormous hit movies within the same calendar year, Ace Ventura, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber. Edward Norton was a complete unknown. And he appears in Primal Fear. And when Primal Fear came out, there was a lot of talk about the fact that he was already working on two other big movies. Woody Allen's Everyone Says I Love You, and Milos Forman. I was going to say Wolfgang Peterson. How bad is that? But Milos Forman's The People vs. Larry Flint, where he plays Larry Flint's attorney. And he holds his own with just a phenomenal performance by Woody Harrelson. I was rooting for Woody Harrelson to win Best Actor. That's how good he is as Larry Flint. And Edward Norton is just marvelous in that movie. I mean, you almost could have given him a Best Supporting Actor nomination for The People versus Larry Flint. That's how good he is in that film. But for someone to come out of nowhere and not only knock Primal Fear out of the park, but he's so good and presumably had impressed people before that, because he had to have been cast in People versus Larry Flint right after he got cast in Primal Fear. Like, I'm assuming that's how he got the audition. Maybe Milos Forman knew filmmaker Gregory Hoblit or some other process, but it happened for him that fast because he was that good. He was that good. And he shows that in this movie. And the Richard Gere character, as I say, similarly to the way the John Travolta character, who was a real guy, starts the movie at a certain high frequency, believing that not only is he a great attorney, but he's great with the press, and he knows how to schmooze and deal with, attorneys on the other side and do some glad handing and get shit done. And in this movie, you get a little of that with the Laura Linney character. Laura Linney plays the opposing counsel, and another cliche, they had a romance and there's still a little something that might be going on, maybe after the case is over, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But she holds her own with him. Laura Linney was really just nailing it in that era. She was doing such great work. She's solid here. She's very good as Clint Eastwood's daughter. I mean, again, you have to say it's a little bit odd casting, but She holds her own with Clint the next year in Absolute Power, and I think she is amazing in The Truman Show. Just amazing. So Gere starts the film here, and as things begin to spiral and the case becomes more complicated than it seemed, it's not just what we thought. There's a lot of other bad stuff going on in this church, and if the kid did it, there's other people that should be taking a fall here, not just him, right? And then so you get into that, it becomes very complicated. Well, it's not complicated for the audience, but there are more components of the case than Richard Gere originally thought. And similar to Travolta in a civil action, what he thinks is a simple case of corporate malfeasance is anything but. And the deeper he digs, the more he digs himself a hole. Now, in this movie, Gere's character doesn't exactly dig himself a hole, but he puts himself into a very bad position where he can't say shit. I'm not going to spoil this, but he can't say shit at the end of the film, or his career will probably be over. He might get disbarred. And attorney-client privilege is a real thing, but there are moments where you would feel that somebody would for sure speak up if they picked up a piece of information, but not at the expense of their career. And you know what, bro? You're going to go to prison. You keep your fucking mouth shut. You're not saying anything. So Primal Fear was a box office hit, and there was some talk about a sequel, but luckily that didn't happen. This was always supposed to be a one-off. I don't think that when they were drawing it up, Gregory Hoblit, who later did a film that's really, I think, underrated by history and should be rediscovered, Fallen, with Denzel. That's probably the best Denzel movie that doesn't get as much love or as much play. What an incredible cast, by the way. Pre-Sopranos, James Gandolfini, John Goodman, just awesome. Elias Koteas playing another of his kind of manic lunatic characters. Really, really good movie. But Primal Fear was a box office hit, and the Oscar buzz was only centered around Edward Norton. And in a similar way also to when I mentioned about Marissa Tomei in My Cousin Vinny, that she got all of the acclaim for supporting performance, and she ended up winning Best Supporting Actress. But White Men Can't Jump, Rosie Perez gave a performance which was also lauded across the board. She's hilarious. A lot of, kind of similar terminology. An actress we're not familiar with just waltzing in and stealing the movie. Everybody who saw Primal Fear, even critics who didn't love it unabashedly, this kid is one to watch. This Edward Norton, we don't know who he is, but what an incredible performance he gives in this movie. And there are certain movies that feel as if they're building towards a big twist. This movie does not. It does not. And so when the big twist comes and we realize it's actually very well handled and it was disguised, not in a manner of like cheating the audience, but it was always there in the text, but we just didn't think to spot it. And The Sixth Sense, another movie where you could say, the clues are there. You have to be paying a little bit of attention. And I will also say that Angel Heart, on second watch, you start to see stuff that you missed the first time through. And the big twist is jaw-dropping, but you can understand how there were certain people, not many, but some people guessed it. Just as with The Sixth Sense, there were people by the end of the first act that guessed it. I would say maybe 2 people out of every 100. Everybody else was completely gobsmacked at the end of that film. So Norton went on to make, movies like Rounders and has had just a stupendous career. He did American History X in 1998. He got a Best Actor nomination, and there were a lot of people that thought he should have won, and I would have had no problem with him winning. That is just an amazing movie. The filmmaker Tony Kaye, very controversial and polarizing figure. I won't get into it. Not because he was like a criminal or something like that, because he was difficult to work with. And Harvey Weinstein took the movie away from Tony Kaye because he felt there was a better film within what was there and what Tony Kaye had shot. And it's very difficult. I'm sorry to have to bring up Harvey, but when you have a filmmaker you think is a brilliant visionary, as Tony Kaye certainly seemed to be, and in that movie in particular, but you feel like you have to make some adjustments. You have to tweak this a little. So Edward Norton actually did the final cut of that movie. That is how much of a whiz-bang. Edward Norton probably has an IQ of 160. Like he's again legit, not just a great artist, but he's an intellectual giant. You know, the guy does everything well. What can you say? But he put together the final cut of that film, what we all saw. I don't know if Tony Kaye's version has ever come out in bootleg. It's the same basic story, but I think that what ended up getting released in the movie that we all saw, as brutal as it is, was a little bit more palatable than how Tony Kaye saw that particular story. But Edward Norton's point is, there are people that thought he should have won. He should have won Best Actor, and he didn't. And I don't think he's won an Oscar. He's certainly given a lot of Oscar-worthy performances, and he's also shown a knack for comedy. Speaking of Milos Forman, he did the film Keeping the Faith with, was it Ben Stiller? And I think Milos Forman played a rabbi in that film. And that was a kind of lighthearted comedy with Jenna Elfman. She looked like she was going to be a bigger star in movies than she was. It just didn't, she had that Dharma and Greg TV show. Some people just don't translate to movies the way others do. Remember, Hollywood kept trying to make Tom Selleck a movie star, and it just didn't take. And the universe is glad that he wasn't able to do Raiders of the Lost Ark, because it would have been High Road to China, a similar kind of movie that Selleck did a number of years later. But Primal Fear, 30 years. I can't believe this movie is 30 years old. But you know what? On the other hand, if I'm being completely honest, April of 1996, it feels like it happened to someone else. My memories are there. I remember being in the theater for Primal Fear. I had a little popcorn, and I had like a 64-ounce Diet Coke. Really brilliant, I know. But it feels like it happened even longer than 30 years ago. But the movie itself is so vibrant and vital, and it's going to feel fresh to audiences seeing it for the first time. You're not going to figure out what's going on, and you will be really floored by the strength of the performances. And even if in this movie Gere gives like the third best performance, he's fine. He's terrific, because this is a character who we want to like more than we do, and then he becomes more sympathetic the further into the story you get. And, Laura Linney, the way she could level him with her eyes, with her smile, really, really good work from her. And the way that the filmmaker Gregory Hoblit kind of ratchets up the tension, because this is not a suspense thriller. This is a courtroom thriller. I would say the 1987 film Suspect, speaking of Cher, the movie with Cher and Dennis Quaid and Liam Neeson and Joe Mantegna, just incredible all-star cast. That's a courtroom thriller that also has the form of a suspense thriller, almost like a little bit of a serial killer angle in that film. John Mahoney also plays a judge in the movie Suspect. But this is a courtroom thriller where the thrills are in the discovery and in what is Richard Gere's character going to do with this piece of information, that piece of information. He can use this in court, but if he tries to bring this up, go fuck yourself, it's not going to fly. And we can make jokes about, lawyer ethics. Yeah, there aren't any. What do you get when you have 10,000 lawyers, or what do you call 10,000 lawyers at the bottom of the ocean? A good start. All the lawyer jokes you want are here. But this is a very well done film, very kind of cerebral. It's a sort of movie, I don't know that they would make it today the same way, giving the story time to breathe and the characters time to take in information, rather than this and rat-tat-tat. The pace is not leisurely, but it's very well paced. They didn't feel the need, because nowadays they probably would take the same story and try to make it 15 minutes shorter. Get the audience in and get them out of there, make sure they're entertained. But Primal Fear is a super entertaining film with great performances across the board. It was a hit. Critics loved it, but I do feel like it's a kind of film that probably should be rediscovered. And for young people, or people who are still in their 20s, they weren't even alive when this movie came out. Forget rediscovered. Young people, young movie fans of thrillers, discover it for the first time. Primal Fear, released on this day, April 5th, 1996, directed by Gregory Hoblit and starring Richard Gere, Laura Linney, and in a stunning film debut, the great Edward Norton. I'll spare you the exaggerated wrap-up. I hope you're all having a marvelous, wonderful, soulful Easter Sunday with friends, family, or both. See you all real soon. Peace.